Prison support charity Nacro has been campaigning for the government to invest in better housing for those leaving prison. And Helen Berresford is from the charity. She's listening in this morning. Morning, Helen.
Morning.
Hiya. We heard Sharon obviously saying COVID had played a massive part, a large part in the increase. Is that the sole reason for that, or is it just really, I guess, highlighted, put a magnifying glass over why there are severe problems?
Yeah, well, that's exactly right. So this isn't just a problem that's come out of COVID. It was a huge problem before COVID. COVID has definitely shone a spotlight on it because the issues have become different. The need has suddenly become, more urgent to make sure that people weren't being released onto the streets in the middle of a global pandemic. But it's absolutely right. And as Sharon put it, there are lots of reasons behind this, but it isn't something that we can't change. Certainly, under normal circumstances, there's around 1,000 people who are released into homelessness every month across the country, and that was before COVID. During COVID, some of those issues were heightened by people who might normally go to friends or family. They might normally go into certain types of housing. Well, they couldn't necessarily do that. Their family might have been vulnerable and shielding, and they just may not have been able to go into some of that accommodation. And where you had kind of hostels and other housing where they may have had an outbreak of COVID, for example, they wouldn't be able to take any more people. So the issues were different. But yeah, it was absolutely an issue before.
Helen, tell me how it works, right? I'm about to leave prison. Tell me what support is there for me, a prisoner, and I don't have somewhere to live when I leave prison. Is it literally just you take your bag and you're out on your own? Surely not.
No. Within prisons, probation, and there are charities like us at Nacro who will support people before release. So kind of 12 weeks before release, we'll put in place support to understand somebody's housing needs. If they are, if we think that they might be at risk of homelessness, then the teams will do as much as they can to try and get them a home, get them somewhere to live. And that will be things like making a referral into the local authority, to have a housing assessment. The biggest challenges that people face are many people who are released from prison won't qualify for priority need housing within a local authority, so they won't be near the top of the list. So they'll find it really difficult to get local authority housing. So then it's down to what else can we do and put in place. But over recent years, we've seen a drop in supported housing, which is the kind of housing that Sharon was referring to,
yes.
Where you have not just a bed, but also support for somebody who might have substance misuse problems, they might have mental health problems. That kind of accommodation isn't as available as it was previously, but also people are more likely to need to go into the private rented accommodation sector.
Right.
But of course, many people who come out homeless were homeless before going into prison, so they don't have lots of money to pay a deposit or a first month's rent or guarantor. So, in many cases, there's just so many barriers for people, which mean that they quite often are released into homelessness and really quite honestly set up to fail.
So is there enough intervention when prisoners are already in jail to find them somewhere to live once they leave?
Well, there definitely is the kind of support there from the teams there, but often it's the kind of join up between prisons and local authorities, and it's the availability, and it's making sure that actually prisoners and people leaving prison aren't just kind of overlooked or go to the bottom of the pile. During COVID, as I said, COVID did shine the spotlight on this issue. The Ministry of Justice introduced an emergency accommodation scheme, recognising that there was a need there that needed to be resolved. And whilst that wasn't a perfect scheme, it absolutely made a difference. So suddenly people who might otherwise have been released directly into homelessness were found accommodation. We were able to get them into places. So it can be done. And that's definitely why for us, we're looking at the spending review coming up and saying, actually, we need to make sure that there are schemes in place, that there's funding in place across the country.
How does the North East compare to other parts of the country? Do you know, Sharon?
Well, so certainly the figures that you referred to from the Ministry of Housing and Communities and Local Government show that the North East has seen a higher increase, and that is definitely the case. And there is quite a lot of regional variation around this, and there will be particular local factors that affect this. So it has seen that increase. One of the things I would say is that the government has introduced some pilot schemes this year, which is really welcome, and they're in 5 regions across the country. But the North East isn't one of those regions. So that's why we're saying, well, actually, we need this scheme to be funded across the whole country, and it needs to be long-term.
Yeah, you're calling on the government to invest in more housing for prisoners. We know there's a housing crisis for people who aren't in prison. Do you accept you may not get, shall we say, a sympathetic shoulder to cry on from people who've not committed a crime and yet they're desperate to get a home? Do you get that?
Well, absolutely. But the reality is that you're quite right. There is a housing crisis across the piece. But what we're talking about is, people who are released from prison and released into homelessness are much more likely to reoffend. This is also about stopping and prevention. And as I said, many who will go into prison were homeless before they went in. So you're right, absolutely, it's about solving that housing crisis across the piece. But it's not right that we're also overlooking a group of people who actually need that intervention, and we can stop and cut reoffending significantly by doing that.
Okay.